you all got something to eat, and welcome again to the Kevorkian Center for our conference on seeing landscape in Israel, Palestine. Thank you guys for coming out to the film screening last night, and I'm looking forward to a very fruitful, productive, exciting day. And like I said last night, this whole conference is a graduate student driven event. Shimrit and Ilker came to us with this idea earlier in the semester, and we've been behind them, but it's their baby. So I want to be as much in the background as possible. I want to hand it over to Shimrit, who's going to get us started, introducing our speakers and our first panelists. But thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming them. All right.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thank you for being here today. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank our co-sponsors one more time, the Department of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies, the Department of Media, Culture and Communications, the Center for Religion and Media, and the Gallatin Human Rights Initiative. And also a huge thank you to the Kevorkian Center for making all of this possible. So here's what's going to happen right now. I'm going to introduce the three panelists, give you a little bio, and then they're going to come up one by one. And then that's going to be followed by some comments and questions from me, to which they can respond, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So this is a double visions of landscape in Israel-Palestine. So first, we're going to hear from Noa Hazan. She's an Israeli visual cultural scholar, currently located in New York. She is the editor of the trilingual book, The Mount, the Dome, and the Gaze, the Temple Mount in Israeli Visual Culture, and the co-editor of Visual Culture in Israel. She publishes her work regularly in academic journals and books on subjects of race, nationalism, photography, and museum studies. And these days, she is completing her book titled Race and Visual Culture in Israel for Indiana University Press. And then next, we're going to hear from Meir. He's an artist, lecturer, and designer. Prior to settling in New York in 1987, he lived and worked in Europe for several years. Among other positions, he was the chief curator for a contemporary private art foundation based in Europe, as well as an art critic for the Tel-Aviv-based Studio Art magazine. Since 1997, he has been teaching fine art and art theory at the City University of New York and the School of Visual Arts, where he is currently a faculty at the Art History, Fine Art, and Visual and Critical Studies departments. And his work has been shown in galleries and museums in Israel, the US, and Europe. And finally, we'll hear from Fatma Shanan, who's a visual artist. Shanan is the winner of the 2016 Chaim Schiff Prize for Figurative Realist Art given by the Tel Aviv Museum, where her fourth solo exhibit opened in the summer of 2017. Shanan is an alumna of several prestigious residency programs, among them the Residency Unlimited program in New York City currently, and the Artport Residency. Her works are included in the collections of the Israel Museum, the Miniature Museum in the Netherlands, the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, the Ilana Gur Museum in Jaffa, and private collections in Israel and abroad. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Noa Hazan.
Oh, yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Shimrit and Ilker, for the invitation to speak in this conference. And I'm really looking forward to hear the speakers today. The program looks absolutely fascinating and well curated. And I'll start with a flyer from Just Fly. The discount flight agency landed in my inbox last September, offering me exclusive flight prices from New York to Tel Aviv, Israel. Surprisingly, the image that was chosen to represent the Israeli destination was the Dome of the Rock, which is actually, as you know, located in Jerusalem and as of today, not part of the Israeli state, but rather is under Jordanian jurisdiction. Thus, Tel Aviv, known as the first Zionist city, represents representing more than any other city in Israel, modernity and progress, has been replaced by an ancient Muslim monument that has become the most obvious symbol for the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. As you can imagine, my encounter with this flyer was pure serendipity, not because I was planning on a flight to Tel Aviv or to Jerusalem, but because it provided a useful jumping off point for my updated discussion on the Dome of the Rock imagery. After analyzing so many images of the Dome of the Rock designed for Israeli audiences, this email unleashed a host of questions. In what kind of magical system of beliefs could a Muslim symbol, such as the Dome of the Rock, serve to advertise Israel? Is it possible that the American Airfare Agency accidentally mixed up the two cities? Can it be that someone there couldn't actually tell the difference or didn't find it that important? Do these people see the Middle East as one big mesh of exotic identical cities that can simply stand in for one another? Is it just a macabre take that undermines the territorial claim of both Israelis and Palestinians for the sake of foreign money? In a very compressed way, the flyer also captures the relationships between imperialism and capitalism and the ways in which these two systems support each other today in our so-called post-colonial era. My reading of the image is, of course, very subjective. I'm not the one whose religious symbol has been co-opted to promote the state that has suppressed me for more than 70 years. On the contrary, my home country will surely gain from the tourists convinced by the flyer to visit Tel Aviv. While the American target audience of the Just Fly ad may have been ignorant of the huge differences between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, the current US administration's meaningful act of moving the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a deliberate political decision that further fueled tension between Israelis and Palestinians. It is worth noticing that the divided screenshot from supposedly neutral ABC News reporting the protest in Gaza at the opening day of the US embassy not only failed to mention the Palestinians by name, but yet again used the iconic view of the Dome of the Rock as a background, this time to represent Gaza, nearly 50 miles away. The inevitable parallel between the two realms, that of tourism and that of politics, brings to mind Jamaica Kincaid's commentary on the tourist industry that relies on a global economic system to reenact the old power disparities between natives and settlers, and consequently recolonizes developing countries as tourist destinations. In her book, A Small Place, Kincaid describes the tourist's main wish not to see anything but his exotic fantasy. Above all, his perception ignores the damage caused by his own government's actions, which led to both personal and national benefits and gains. Although Kincaid's work referred to the Caribbean and to Antigua in particular, we can also easily find the same adult gaze towards the Middle East. Inviting one to modern Tel Aviv by showing the ancient Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem and reporting the protest in Gaza while showing again the Dome of the Rock made me think that the iconic image of the dome is merely a common American synecdoche for Israel in general, despite the fact, again, that it is not even located within the official state of Israel.
downloading it again?
I'm sorry. Can I stop for a second and find my? Because I think I have it here.
Sorry about that.
Do we have? How can we do it?
You want to connect from this computer?
No, I need this one for my notes, and
Oh,
I
okay.
have this for
Oh,
the images.
Oh, okay. So that should just be a USB.
Do you have a USB?
Yeah, it should be right here. Yeah. Can I? Yeah, it's enough. It just should go right in there. Okay. And you should be able to pull it from us.
I'll give you a couple of seconds.
Thank you. Oh, here it is. Oh, what?
Can you maybe just describe what the image is supposed to be?
Yeah, it's a book, but I see that there are too many images that.
Do you know what format those images are in? No.
But you know what? Let's just live with it.
Okay.
Oh, that's not good. This is critical. Most of the images are just.
I don't know what happened.
This is even worse than the other one? I don't know.
Nadia, on your computer?
Yeah,
Is your computer the second one? Maybe you can just switch
and have the images.
from your computer.
We can open the text
Yeah.
in this one.
They appear on your computer?
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. This is we have to get a dock. I might have to go. Well, she won't be able to plug into that because she doesn't have any.
Wait, I
lines.
just want to make sure I do have everything on this one. Okay, yeah. Perfect.
If I could get behind you.
So we won't need.
Do you have text for this, please?
Yeah, I would. Cool. This is one of those. Whoops, that was completely different keyboard.
It's a little bit different.
That's for a USB on one end. I mean, I don't have a. Yeah, like I don't have something that connects USB to that. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. We need like another computer because
I get it. So
you don't have the dongle that goes to the
no, I
HDMI.
left it at home, unfortunately. But wait, can we somehow
Do you
pass?
upload this to the cloud? Is that how you got it onto there? Or
Download, I think it's not showing that slide.
oh,
Yeah,
it's the
well,
download.
downloading.
That's weird.
But it's weird.
What file format is it in? It's in
It's
PowerPoint.
a PowerPoint.
Are you playing it on here in PowerPoint?
But this computer is probably older or something.
It is. Oh, that's probably it. Yeah.
Because in this version of my Mac, there is no problem.
It's all good.
I did it as a PDF. I printed as PDF.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect, let's
That's a
close
good
it
idea.
here.
Yeah.
As
Well,
PDF.
from here,
Shimrit, do you want to start over like with Meir and Fatma and I'll join you?
Sure.
that
I'll
might
do
be
it.
better. Yeah, because this will take a minute.
But
Right,
we
so
will
you
need the
just print-
computer.
Print this as PDF and
I'll
email
close it
it
as
to.
PDF. Perfect.
You want to put it on your thumb drive there, your USB? There you go. Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
Don't worry about it.
Well, it's.
Do you want to begin your presentation? We're having some technical problems. You just need your website. Screen.
Okay. Shimrit, I opened it once.
And all the pictures are there?
Yes. Yeah, we don't need the HDMI.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't need the HDMI.
Does she have an adapter?
No, she doesn't. That's fine. If you can
Is this not the same size? Like a
No. I actually can open it on my computer. We don't have that.
I need a took. Oh, sorry.
Get out of there. I don't know if I turned it. Jim, how I turn it?
Should be a power button. Or it's on. You just have to plug it in. That thing. Goes on the other side.
Okay, we're gonna get started with our second presentation.
Yeah, that end is one. The projection. So it takes over. Yeah. Okay, yeah. And now you're
You can make
projecting
it
on right
full
behind.
screen.
Okay, so let me see what
Analysis. Okay. Okay, we're gonna get started again. Sorry about the delay. With Meir Gal. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm hearing that there is a rainstorm coming in a few hours, so hopefully we'll sit it out over here. A confession that I have to make. I haven't done this in about a decade. I was very involved in the 80s and 90s with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. both here in Palestine and Israel, and then as the levels of my depression and PTSD grew, I decided to quit, and that was in 2008. Unfortunately, as Noah, where are you, Noah? Where's Noah? As Noah and I discussed last night, things are just getting worse. The main reason for my departure or departing the scene 10 years ago was not sudden. I've been thinking about it for quite a while. The crisis itself actually started earlier on when the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. That was in 1995, right? It was December 4th. November 4th. November 4th, thank you. November 4th, 1995. I should say that I don't want to offend anyone in the room with my views, which is almost always the case. So I just want everybody here to understand that NYU, just like the School of Visual Arts where I teach, and other schools in the city and in the world, these are secular academic institutions where we are allowed and invited to talk about practically anything in the world. I'm saying that because I gave a talk at the at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, probably about 15 or 16 years ago, and I was talking about the occupation, and I was talking about the racial divide in Israel. And it's as if I had two different audiences for the talk. When I was talking about racism and ethnic conflict and rife in Israel, the audience was pretty much with me, and I could feel a very good vibe from the audience. But when I switched to talk about the connection between the ethnic conflict in Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict, somebody actually rose from his seat, approached me, and back then we didn't have all this fancy equipment. We had slides and slide projectors. So he picked up the slide projector and smashed it to the ground. This was at the Hebrew University Auditorium for Social Sciences and Humanities. More shocking than that, out of the 300 people who attended the event, only 9 or 8 expressed disappointment regarding what this person had done. The rest of the audience were very much in support. The person basically didn't want me to speak anymore. Right? So I'm hoping that nobody here will be offended to that degree. And I'm saying that vis-a-vis the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, which I'm sure some of you took it personally. At that time, November 4th, which is almost to the day, right? 1995, I was in Tel Aviv. I've been living in the States now for 30 years, but at that time I worked on a one-person show for the Tel Aviv Museum of Art for 1 year. And long process, very arduous and work intensive. And 4 days before the opening, my opening was supposed to be November 8th. 4 days before the opening, I am in the museum by myself, Saturday night, working away, trying to meet the deadline. And news broke out that he was shot. And then a few minutes later that he died from his wounds. Right? This is basically the first political assassination in Israel proper since the creation of the country. Right? So it shocked everyone, of course. It shocked me as well. So I left the museum and I went out to see what was going on in Tel Aviv. And what I saw shocked me and changed my political views forever. What I saw was thousands and tens of thousands of Israelis holding candles Anybody was there at that time? Okay, so I guess I'm the only eyewitness. No, yeah.
We're here holding candles.
I'm sorry?
We're here holding candles.
Yeah, you were here holding candles. People were holding candles pretty much all over the world because it was not only the end of a person, but it was also the end of an era. All the TV and radio channels at the time switched to broadcasting short stories and songs about this legendary Israeli male. And at that point, and again I apologize, at that point I realized that there is very little value to the work that I do, and that at some point I should stop, which I did, a few years later. What I saw was in my opinion, a very fascistic practice of a nation mourning for the fallen father, who in Israeli politics was regarded very highly, but his practices were quite questionable. If you look at the history of Yitzhak Rabin and what he did, and I see some people here nodding in agreement, he was not, and again, I really feel very uncomfortable to speak badly about people who already died. But again, this is a secular event, and we need to spell it out. So, death and bloodshed has been part and parcel of his activities from day one, going back to 1948, the expulsion of Palestinians from Palestine in 1947, 48, 49. And I'm very glad that the director who made Reconnection yesterday is here to listen to the talk. Thank you again. Great piece. And then moving forward to what happened in 53, 56, 67, the war of attrition between 1969 and 1971. So if you look at the history of Yitzhak Rabin, you see basically bloodshed, aggression, violence, occupation, which lasted pretty much until the last day of his life. So that, for me, was the first crack in my conviction regarding the validity of my own work. There were a few more cracks along the way, and then in 2008, which is about 10 years ago, I decided to quit altogether. A few weeks ago, Shimrit approached me. We had a very nice conversation. My intention was to say, no, I'm not part of this. I had enough. Things are just getting worse. But then for some reason, I decided to say yes, and here I am. So for the sake of geographical and historical clarity, without which I don't think you'll be able to understand my work, let me tell you a little bit about my background, which serves as the context for my work today. So, born in 1958, and in a very curious way, first generation Israeli. My parents were also born in the same place, but when they were born, which is 1924 and 1930, respectively, my mother in 1930, my father in 1924, they were born in Palestine as Jews, right? They both trace their ancestry to Spain and to Morocco. And although we were born in the same city, almost, right, we cannot consider ourselves as coming from the same place. My mother was born in Old Jerusalem, what later became known as Old Jerusalem, which is the only Jerusalem at that time. West Jerusalem came into being much later on in history. So she was born there in 1930. My father was born in Hebron, which is Khalil, in 1924. In 1929, there were 2 days of riots. And maybe, Kamal, maybe you have done something about that in the past, where the British left several Palestinian cities in the north, in the center, and in the south, allowing the Jews and the Palestinian Jews and the Muslim Jews to engage in mutual massacres that lasted 2 days, and then they came back in to intervene and stop the massacres. This event is taught in Israeli schools as the 1929 riots, and I remember studying it myself. And we learned in schools that 1,100 Jews were slaughtered by Arabs, among them two cousins, or two great cousins of mine, following which my family was saved by by their own Palestinian landlord and evacuated to Jerusalem the next day, upon which my grandmother walked around and collected cousins and nephews and nieces and grandchildren from schools and from hospitals in Jerusalem to basically try to reunite the family. The actual occurrence of that day was that not only 1,100 Jews were slaughtered that day, but 1,300 Palestinians were slaughtered that day. And if you doubt my statistics, just read Tom Segev, one and two countries, and you will see that this information is correct. So the slaughter went on for 2 days, after which the country was never again functioning in the same way, and people understood that past 1929, the entire trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is going to take a new route. So, first generation Israeli, parents both Mizrahi Jews, Israelis who were born in Palestine in 24 and 30, respectively, in Jerusalem and in the West Bank city of Hebron, very much aware, and this is the point, this is the crux of the matter for my talk, very much aware that 10 years prior to my birth, a state was born, a state was created. And so, from a very young age, I started following how this nation state is functioning. Through schools, through trips that Kamal, you mentioned, that you saw all kinds of scenes in movies where Israeli families are traveling around the country. That was pretty much put into the program by the government, in which they wanted Israelis to travel as much as possible and get to know the country according to the new history that they were imposing on the place. Okay. So I was very much aware of the success of the nation state as an entity unto itself, having studied the various ways with which Israel created itself and the type of indoctrination imposed on the population right from inception in 48. I myself decided to take a different approach to becoming a dissident. I was studying the work of various dissidents in the region, in other places in the world, and I spent a decade studying the activities of revolutionary groups around the world, with a focus on Che Guevara and Fidel, and what they did in Cuba and in Mexico prior to launching the revolution in Cuba. I also studied the Shanan Path, the Red Army, and then one European example was the Baader-Meinhof group, who worked in Germany in the 1970s. I looked at all their achievements and I looked at all their failures, which I'm afraid to say were more failures than achievements, and in some cases made the situation a lot worse. And I decided that instead of attempting to be a dissident or a counterculture artist, that I would basically launch a 10-year-long project, which I called Imitate the State. I just launched it in 1994, and the parameters for that project are very, very simple. I basically looked into every area of life and decided to imitate the way that the Israeli government operates. And since it has been so successful in literally indoctrinating the entire population to believe in one version of history, I decided that I will basically imitate the methodology that the state had imposed. And I chose 5 different areas. One of them was, and I'll quickly show you a couple slides, because I'm being told that I have 5 minutes. This says in Hebrew to measure and to transfer. And these are old blankets that were taken from, that were bought in Palestine. And it shows, it basically talks about how when the war ended in 1948, the Israeli army sent specialists who measured every single object that was left by Palestinians, homes, fields, orchards, factories, workshops. They measured everything, they cataloged it. I was diligent enough to also obtain all the documents regarding all the property that was left in Palestine. As you know, close to 800,000 Palestinians were expelled, and they left behind an entire nation, right? And that property was not left unattended. For those of you who don't know, the Israeli army and the 2 parties in power at the time took the entire property that was left by Palestinians in 1948 and divided it among themselves and to the military. So social stratification in Israel was created almost overnight and in 1 year, establishing ownership over factories, livestock, agricultural fields, and most importantly, land. Okay, so this is one example. This is another. And so this is one project that I did in 1994 as a result of, as part of Imitate the State. The second project, which is why Shimrit invited me today, is, so this doesn't come up. Let's try again, here we go. This project was titled Erasing the Major Museums. What happened with this project is very interesting. I was already living here at that time. I came to the United States in '86. And from time to time, I would be invited to do shows either here or in Europe. But as a site-specific artist, site-specific means that as an artist, you don't just do any type of work and you show it anywhere. You make work that is specific to that location and sometimes specific to that building or specific to that room, right? There are artists who've done work in Europe that were made specifically for chambers in various parts of Europe where the Nazis used to conduct interrogations and torturing back in the 40s. So as a site-specific artist, I traveled from New York to the city of Haifa, which is the Haifa Museum of Art is the institution who invited me to come and do the show. The show was supposed to be about the relationship, the complex relationship between artists and art institutions. If anybody in the room is an artist, you know very well what these complications are. On one hand, you're on the fringe, and you are working, exposing, analyzing, criticizing society from every possible angle. On the other hand, when you create something, it's being shown. It's being shown. It's being shown in art institutions. Yeah, that was a little scary. Yes. Yeah. After LA, everybody's nervous, right? So when I visited the place, I was told that it's a new Israeli museum, very, very large building that occupied a few blocks. And when I wanted to find out what the history of the building was, the curators were very fuzzy about it. So I decided to do my own research. And of course, I found out that the museum is built in the museum was built inside a building that used to house Palestinian girls up until 1948. And I thought about the irony and the paradox that Israeli fine art is housed in a school where for many, many years Palestinian girls used to attend school every day. And now they're expelled either in Jordan or in Lebanon or in Gaza, right? Because they disperse all over. Right? So instead of doing the exhibition that I was told to do, I decided to take all the money that they gave me at that time, which was $6,000, and spend it on hiring a pilot and a small plane. And I went up in the air in order to photograph the museum and to show the architecture. This is again a topic that is very prominent in your film, Kamal. Just to show that the museum itself is an Arab structure and the whole entire neighborhood is Arab, and to talk about the paradoxical relationship between contemporary Israeli art and the past of that particular location. Right? So while I was in the air taking pictures, the pilot tells me, well, you can't just use pictures any way you want. These are aerial photographs, and they, without you knowing, they contain military information that you are not allowed to publish. Because when you're photographing from the air, you capture a building, right? But then you capture a lot of other things around it. So I said, what am I supposed to do? He said, well, you will have to submit your work you have to submit all the contact sheets from the trip that we just did to the military censor. They will give it back to you with markings, and the markings are basically the erasure of military bases and military sensitive spaces around each of the museums that you have photographed. So immediately I said to myself, that's the project. It was for me, and I'm rushing because I have a minute left. What I basically did was, I understood that the Israeli military just gave me a brilliant opportunity to disclose military secrets, to disclose the location of, back then we didn't have Facebook and we didn't have Photoshop. So if you had to erase something off of the surface of a picture, you had to literally erase it. What I did was, if you can see, I basically scorched the surface of the photograph and removed the image. Today what they do with Photoshop, they take another part of the city and they superimpose it, and you don't even see it. By the way, Noah, a few years ago, a friend of mine gave me, for Passover, he gave me a box of matzah with the view of the Dome of the Rock, right? And Dome of the Rock is erased by Photoshop. And instead they put in another part of the old city. This is just for your research, I'll give it to you. So what we're looking over here, and I'm going to stop because somebody's getting really angry at me. What you see over here is an aerial view of Tel-Aviv, okay, which is the biggest city in Israel. On the right is the Tel-Aviv Museum of Art, which I erased. What do you think is on the left? Anybody knows Tel-Aviv pretty well?
Ayalon Highway.
That's the Akirya, which is one of the largest army bases in the country. Some people believe that all the nuclear bomb shelters are down there. So look at the proportions, right? So small, yet so huge. And so I did the same thing with the 6 largest museums in Israel, erasing both the museums and all the museums and all the army bases around it, practically saying that museums are in the service of the government just like military bases. And I think I'll stop here.
Great, thank you. Noah? Is Noah here? Do you want to finish your presentation?
Is Jim? Did Jim bring the that was it? No?